You can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good.
Of course, the president made a lot of other statements that raised eyebrows in that news conference and afterwards. The afternoon's surprise statement, read carefully from a script, came as the administration and congressional Republicans tried to deal with a tsunami of criticism over the president's comments following his summit with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Rich Edson's at the State Department about whether any real policy changes happened between the U.S. and Russia. Catherine Herridge with the intelligence community reaction to Putin's offer to help with the investigation. Mike Emanuel with lawmaker reaction to the summit on Capitol Hill. But we begin with correspondent Kristen Fisher at the White House with the president's parsed explanation today. Good evening, Kristen.
That's right, Brett. Good evening. You know, in the words of Newt Gingrich, he called this the biggest mistake of Trump's presidency. And now President Trump is blaming it in part on a grammatical mistake, a double negative. He says that after all the blowback, he went back and looked at a transcript of his press conference with Putin, and he says that that's when he realized that he simply misspoke. A stunning admission and rare reversal from President Donald Trump. Just one day after he stood next to Russian President Vladimir Putin and refused to answer who he believed more, his own intelligence community, that Russia meddled in the 2016 election, or Putin's strong denials, today, President Trump did a 180.
I accept our intelligence community's conclusion that Russia's meddling in the 2016 election took place. Could be other people also.
He also admitted he misspoke when he said this.
I don't see any reason why it would be. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative. So you can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
Earlier in the day, Republicans on Capitol Hill roundly criticized the president for not sticking up for the United States.
The Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
I think it was a bad day for the president. I think he can fix it. I think he needs to fix it.
President Trump tried to do just that at a meeting a few hours later with House Republicans to talk about tax reform.
I have full faith and support for America's great intelligence agencies.
But he also continues to say that he believes his meeting with Putin was more successful than his meeting with our NATO allies. And tonight, in an interview with Fox's Tucker Carlson, he will continue his criticism of German Chancellor Angela Merkel.
Angela was a superstar until she allowed millions of people to come into Germany. That really hurt her badly, as you know. She was unbeatable in any election. She allowed millions of people to come in.
But today, a rebuke of President Trump's immigration policies from his predecessor.
For a mother with a child in her arms, we can recognize that could be somebody in our family. That could be my child.
Speaking in South Africa to mark the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's birth, former President Barack Obama warned against the rise of quote-unquote strongman politics in his first high-profile speech since leaving office.
We see the utter loss of shame among political leaders where they're caught in a lie and they just double down and they lie some more.
But today, President Trump did not double down. Instead, he issued that clarification, though it remains to be seen if that clarification will be enough to quell his critics. Brett.
Kristen Fisher live on the North Lawn. Kristen, thank you. Democrats on Capitol Hill, as you saw, were on the warpath following the Helsinki press conference. Many Republicans were running for cover. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has the latest tonight.
Congress strengthen sanctions.
Sanctions.
Do you think there's political will for that?
I don't know.
In the aftermath of the widely panned Helsinki summit, it isn't entirely clear if Congress will be able to agree on a legislative response. House Speaker Paul Ryan says he's open to more financial penalties against Moscow.
We'd already put in place sanctions if the Foreign Affairs Committee or the Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking Committee think that there are other sanctions that we have not yet placed upon Russia, I'm more than happy to consider those.
Others suggest one way to get President Trump's attention is by trying to restrict him on tariffs.
To me, a very direct step we could take right now is go ahead and vote on this tariffs legislation and take back those authorities.
The Senate Majority Leader issued this warning to the Kremlin.
Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
The Senate Democratic leader issued this call for action.
Our Republican colleagues need to join us in demanding testimony from the President's national security team that was in Helsinki, and we need to do that immediately. We need hearings as soon as possible to assess what President Trump might have committed to President Putin in secret.
In response, the Senate Republican whip called for setting aside the partisan bickering to focus on preventing more election meddling.
We better wake up, and rather than the blame game and pointing fingers, we better get ready for the next election, the midterm election in 2018.
The Senate Intelligence Vice Chair says there should be strong bipartisan support, and failure isn't an option.
If Congress doesn't act, then I think we give a signal to the rest of the world that this is now the new American policy, a policy that embraces Putin and all he represents.
New Hampshire Democrat Senator Jeanne Shaheen is calling on the Foreign Relations Committee to hold a hearing with President Trump's American interpreter. She argues that way lawmakers will know exactly what was discussed and agreed to in the private Trump-Putin meeting. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. President Putin's offer to help special counsel Robert Mueller question Russian operatives accused in the election meddling case is being met with a collective eye roll in the intelligence community in the U.S. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has that part of the story tonight.
This was absolutely Putin capitalizing on his KGB training. He is a master manipulator.
Former senior intelligence officials like Bob Gurley, with 30 years of experience, said the Helsinki news conference was classic KGB, with the Russian president undermining confidence and further dividing Americans.
The intelligence community professionals I've been speaking with for the last day and a half have all consistently said they believe Putin's primary goal is to weaken Western institutions, and he successfully did that at the Helsinki summit by weakening the institution of the office of the presidency.
We can analyze them through the joint working group on cybersecurity.
That offer from Putin to work side by side with the U.S. on election hacking was described by intelligence officials and politicians as flat out disingenuous.
That's like bringing ISIS into a joint terrorism task force meeting.
After his tweet attacking the president, former CIA Director John Brennan claimed the wounds go deep.
What Mr. Trump did yesterday was to betray the women and men of the FBI, the CIA, NSA, and others, and to betray the American public. And that's why I used the term that this was nothing short of treasonous.
On CNN, a former CIA director was asked whether the nation's top spy, Dan Coats, and others should resign or stay on the job to, quote, protect the American people from their own president.
When you talk about the heads of agencies, Gina Haspel at CIA, Paul Nakasone at NSA, and other folks like that, we need them because they're responsible for the basic blocking and tackling. Director Coates, Senator Coates, is in the job because of his political gravitas, and so there might be different requirements on him.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia.
Even before the president's clarification, there were reservations.
We'll see how he backs away from that, but the damage was done.
But after Helsinki, Director Coates said the intelligence community has been clear with the president about Russia's ongoing and pervasive efforts to undermine the democratic process. On Thursday, DNI Coates will participate in the annual Aspen Security Forum, an engagement that was booked weeks ago, Brett.
And, Catherine, there's new pressure tonight on the Deputy Attorney General.
Well, that's right. Two House Republicans are urging the Justice Department's Inspector General Michael E. Horowitz to investigate whether Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein threatened congressional staffers during a January meeting over their request for records about the Russia case. Fox News first reported the allegations last month after reviewing emails that documented the incident for the House General Counsel. Congressman Meadows and Jordan said they are concerned Rosenstein may have abused his authority. During recent congressional testimony, Rosenstein said under oath the claims are false, Brett.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Special counsel Robert Mueller is asking for immunity for 5 witnesses in the proceedings against a former top Trump advisor. The witnesses were not identified. They would be part of the case against former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, who's accused of bank fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and tax crimes. Also today, a judge has denied a change of venue motion from Manafort's legal team. Now that we have dealt with the president's comments about the election, let's take time to ask if anything about U.S. policy toward Russia or about Russia has really changed as a result of this summit in Helsinki. Correspondent Rich Edson takes a look from the State Department tonight.
Following President Trump's roundly criticized performance in Helsinki, Russian President Vladimir Putin told state media that he and President Trump had very substantive conversations. Though with no signed summit agreement, it's unclear what, if anything, the presidents agreed to beyond support for peace between Syria and Israel and vague promises of continued cooperation and dialogue. There are still major differences between the countries on Iran, Syria, sanctions, and NATO expansion.
For us, well, it's a direct and immediate threat for our national security. So, accordingly, moving this NATO infrastructure towards our borders would be a threat, and the reaction would be extremely negative.
Days before the summit, NATO did just that, formally inviting Macedonia to begin membership discussions, potentially becoming the 30th nation to join the international security alliance established to counter Russia.
There was no recognition of Crimea by the United States. There was no reneging of U.S. military and security commitments to Europe. And there was also no deal on Syria, which was rumored right in the lead up to the summit. So we saw no deliverables, no commitments. So in a very practical way, in a real way, nothing was lost or gained.
The U.S. and Russia already attempted a ceasefire in southwest Syria. Russia violated it and still backs the regime there as Bashar al-Assad restores control over more of the country. The Russian president pointed out Russia opposes the U.S. withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement. The U.S. also maintains substantial sanctions against dozens of Russians, though analysts say a loss on optics for the United States could translate into foreign policy setbacks.
It gave the United States the appearance of weakness, which was unwarranted, and it gave Russia the appearance of strength, which was even more unwarranted.
Administration officials describe these Helsinki meetings as beginnings of a conversation between the United States and Russia. As for whether Presidents Trump and Putin will meet again, the officials say they are still reviewing the conversations from yesterday and considering their next steps. Brett?
Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. House Republican leaders will not hold a quick vote on a Democratic bill to abolish Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. They will instead offer a non-binding GOP measure lauding the agency and ridiculing calls for its elimination. That vote is set for tomorrow. Up next, a primary runoff with a familiar ring to voters in one southern state. First, here's with some of our Fox affiliates around the country.